And the whole earth was of one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth.
Zion, my eldest child, was born at 23 weeks gestation versus what is considered a normal pregnancy at 40 weeks. When I was early in my pregnancy with him, I didn't think that there could even be a possibility that there could be a complication. I became sick during my pregnancy. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which was severe nausea and vomiting. I was constantly throwing up for the first 4 months of my pregnancy. Around 5 months, I went to see my doctor for a routine prenatal visit. As I was sitting in the doctor's office, I noticed a picture on the wall that said, if you feel like something is wrong, something is wrong. Tell your doctor. I felt like something was wrong, so that's what I did. I told my doctor. I told her that I was having severe pains, and she said, oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. Go home, and I'll see you next time. So that's what I did. I went home. 1 week later, I went into preterm labor. At 23 weeks, my son was born, 1 pound, 3 ounces. His ears were still in his head. His eyes were still fused shut. His fingers were smaller than rice, and his skin was translucent, a black baby, translucent skin. You could see his lungs. He could fit within the palm of my hand. We were told he had a 0% chance of life. The chief of neonatal surgery happened to be in the hospital that morning and saw my case on the surgical board, and she decided to try to resuscitate him. It worked, and for the first month of his life, Zion was on the ventilator fighting to live. For 4 months, he was in the neonatal care unit. Every day, Black women are subjected to harsh and racist treatment during pregnancy and childbirth. Every day, Black women die because the system denies our humanity. It denies us patient care. I sit before you today as a single mom, as a nurse, as an activist, and as a congresswoman, and I am committed to doing the absolute most to protect Black mothers, to protect Black babies, to protect Black birthing people, and to save lives. Thank you, and I yield back.
Missouri Representative Cori Bush made a bit of a splash last month when she dared to utter the phrase, birthing persons. She was discussing challenges she's faced from the medical industry as someone who, well, gives birth. Of course, we heard the standard J.K. Rowling response, don't you mean mothers? And of course, that's a little silly because Representative Bush did say mothers, and she did say women, but she also happened to say birthing persons. And yeah, birthing person does sound a little awkward. I didn't even know you could conjugate birth like that, but that's fine. Sometimes it can be awkward to learn a new word. There's even a whole subgenre of dad joke where you just pretend to not understand exactly how a slang word works, which if you ask me, is pretty sus. But after hearing Representative Bush speak, some people got really upset at having to learn a new phrase.
Republicans were pretty quick to slam the wokeness of the representative's terminology. Republican Nancy Mace wrote, birthing people, you mean women or mums? The left is so woke, they're stripping from women the one thing that only we can do.
And there's a comment below this video that seems to have resonated with a lot of viewers. Calling women birthing people, chest-feeding people, and menstruating people is dehumanizing to women. This is misogyny. Is this language dehumanizing? I guess that's one way to look at it, but let's try another example. If you call someone who walks a walking person, is that dehumanizing? I mean, you're doing the same thing, identifying a whole human by their ability to do one thing that actually a lot of people can do. But it doesn't hit the ear the same way, right? Like, it's not as immediately objectionable. So, what about birthing people or people who menstruate? I mean, this is clearly language that's meant to be more inclusive to transgender people. So, does language somehow get more dehumanizing when we bring the transes into it? Let's put trans people aside, for now. If you were a marketing exec and you were hired by Tampax to make an advert, you might describe your target audience as girls and women. And that's honestly a pretty good approximation. But I don't think a Tampax commercial will interest very young girls or very old women, right? So, to be more specific, you could say girls and women who menstruate. That's not so bad, right? Well, what if we plug trans people back into the equation? Because whether you like it or not, trans people have money. And some of them would probably buy Tampax. So to be as descriptive as possible, Tampax advertises to people who menstruate. Dehumanizing doesn't even enter into the equation. The only thing we're interested in is precision. But let's be real, marketing doesn't actually need to be so precise. Not like science. Science needs to be precise. Or law. Lawyers and lawmakers have to be very precise in the way they use language to do their job. And if you were to write a law that has to do with, I don't know, people who give birth, how would you write that in the most unambiguous way? It's there. It's people who give birth. Or even birthing people. And I get it. Birthing people kinda sits in the mouth weird. It's an awkward phrase. But have you ever read laws? This shit's awkward. There's this local far-right podcast that I kind of hate watch, and I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to promote them on my channel. The host once said something that really stuck in my craw. The host once compared the use of non-binary personal pronouns to George Orwell's Newspeak. The idea being that the pronouns they and them are very clearly plural pronouns, and to just insist that a plural pronoun could be used for a singular person was Orwellian.
Using words like they and trying to provide them as a singular meaning. Like, I don't understand how, again, these things are happening. Like, y'all need to read 1984 because the newspeak and doublespeak that's going on in the Ministry of Truth type of stuff, this is that shit on steroids.
And although I feel like I've heard this argument before, I was hoping it was a fringe position. It's not.
And the theory of Newspeak is that the party, Big Brother, is going to get rid of all the old language that people have used for centuries and centuries and replace it with this new ideological, party-approved clean language, which sounds robotic. It sounds so crazy. Instead of saying something is bad, you'll say it's ungood or double plus ungood.
Right. But so what does that sound like right now? It sounds like he, him, they, her.
And yeah, war is peace, freedom is slavery and all that, but 1984 isn't a novel about the dangers of learning new words. In fact, just the opposite. In the book, Newspeak is described as the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year. The whole way that it works is by boiling down advanced concepts to simple dichotomies. The less you can say about a topic like, I don't know, say gender, the less you can actually understand it. The first time I read 1984 was in 9th grade, and I think that's about an appropriate age, right? It's a high school book, I think that's fair to say. But with all due respect, many people in the US aren't exactly operating at a high school level. Like, I'm sure we all know plenty of high-functioning adults who are unable to perform 9th grade mathematics. So would it be unreasonable to suggest that many functioning adults are unable to perform 9th grade reading comprehension? I mean, we have a whole game show about it. Besides that, our last president spoke with a 4th grade vocabulary, and other Republican presidents didn't do too much better. If you're attracted to that level of rhetoric, my guess is you maybe don't have the reading comprehension skills required for high school books. And that's fine. Own it. But since 1984 is kind of about the politics of literacy, there's a non-zero chance that those who need to understand 1984 the most are actually the least capable. So, might I suggest, if you're into 4th grade level presidents, maybe you would benefit from a 4th grade level book. It's Frindle! Frindle is a story about a 5th grader and his dictionary-loving English teacher. One day, Nick asks Mrs. Granger where the dictionary gets its words from. I still don't really get the idea of why words all mean different things. Like, who says that DOG means the thing that goes woof and wags its tail? Who says so? Who says dog means dog? You do, Nicholas. You and I and everyone in this class and this school and this town and this state and this country. We all agree. But if all of us in this room decided to call that creature something else, and if everyone else did too, then that's what it would be called, and one day it would be written in the dictionary that way. We decide what goes in that book. And she pointed at the giant dictionary. Nick decides to make up the word Frindle to replace the word pen. He's persistent, which generates some controversy, but eventually the word catches on with the class and then the school. A local paper writes about it, and eventually the story gets picked up by Good Morning America and David Letterman. All the while, Mrs. Granger resists Frindle. She even punishes her own students for using the word. After 10 years, the word is added to Webster's dictionary. Now a college student, Nick receives a copy from Mrs. Granger, who confesses that she was only pushing back against the word because she wanted it to succeed. Pretty easy plot to follow. No pesky political subterfuge. We've just got a normal person who wants to use language the way it's always worked among the common people. And then we've got an authority who wants to limit the development of language. Repeat, the authority wants to limit the development of language. Just like in 1984. Got it? But I'm not saying that 1984 doesn't apply to gender at all. In fact, just the opposite. I believe 1984 is incredibly trans-affirming. And of course, it would have to be. Book burnings in Nazi Germany were obviously an inspiration for the behavior of Big Brother. And one of the most prominent victims of these book burnings was the German Institute for Sex Research. This was a research institute dedicated to advocacy surrounding LGBTQ+ rights. They provided medical care for transgender patients and championed the doctrine of sexual intermediacy, which is similar to our modern understanding of gender and sexuality as spectrums. And the Institute's archives were burned by the Nazis. Because it's the trans folks who are developing the language in order to talk about more complex ideas, and it's the right-wing authorities who are trying to prevent that development of language. Like when the Trump administration banned the CDC from using the word transgender in official documents. And instead of using the phrase science-based, the agency was told to use science in consideration with community standards and wishes. Which sounds fine until you think about it. What community standards? Whose wishes? Sometimes these community standards and wishes can be diametrically opposed to science, which seems like a bad standard for a scientific agency. And let's go back to the birthing person thing. Yes, we should be critical of the language our lawmakers use, so let's be critical. A birthing person is a person who gives birth. It may not be politically correct, but it is facts and logic TM. Even if you believe only women can give birth, women are people, so birthing person still applies. And that's right, I said birthing person is not politically correct. There's kind of this misconception that you have to accept people's gender identity or you'll be exiled from society.
Even people that are powerful within the feminist movement, if they dare say anything about women and trans, they get kicked out. People like J.K. Rowling. So this is a tyranny, a woke tyranny.
But that's just not the reality. In case you need reminding, 34 U.S. states have introduced anti-transgender legislation just this year. It may seem like everyone is pro-LGBTQ these days, but that's just another feature of capitalism. Corporations don't adopt rainbow logos in the month of June because it's the right thing to do. They do it because it's the most profitable marketing move. And guess what? Frindle has a whole subplot dedicated to this idea. When Bud Lawrence saw the article about the new word, he had his lawyer file a preliminary trademark claim on the word Frindle. Within 4 days, he had set up a small company that was selling cheap plastic ballpoint pens, specially imprinted with the word Frindle. He sold 3,000 Frindles the first week, and they sold so fast that stores all over Westfield couldn't keep them in stock. Bud Lawrence has absolutely no dog in the Frindle versus pen race. But he knows he can make money if he appeals to the Frindle camp. Because even though he couldn't give two shits about the Frindlers, he knows that their money is green. All that to say, actually supporting transgender people is still quite a controversial position in the US, and the response to birthing people proves that. As Cori Bush herself said, I testified in front of Congress about nearly losing both of my children during childbirth because doctors didn't believe my pain. Republicans got more upset about me using gender-inclusive language in my testimony than my babies nearly dying. So, since Republicans are so keen on policing the language surrounding gender, what do they mean when they say non-secular, self-asserted, sex-based identity narrative? I'm serious. This is a real thing that Republican lawmakers have tried to make happen in at least 3 states. Granted, all of these bills have failed, but it's still worth discussing if we're worried about Big Brother taking our genders away. According to North Dakota House Bill 1476, as introduced by Terry B. Jones, a non-secular, self-asserted, sex-based identity narrative is an unproven, faith-based identity, implicitly religious moral stance that is not predicated on self-evident neutral truth, and is a story that provides the individual with a sense of purpose and serves as a commentary on sexual practices, sexual preference, faith, morality, and life. Got it? See, when the left uses unorthodox language, you get things like uterus owners and penis owners, which describe people who have uteruses or penises. And when the right uses unorthodox language, we get non-secular, self-asserted, sex-based identity narrative, which describes, it's gender, right? Like, Republican lawmakers are trying their darndest to write laws about gender without actually ever using the word gender. Non-secular. Gender. Yes! That's all right. Oh. And they're stuck in this limbo where they have to describe gender in legalese while still just loading it up with false implications. Like, let's roll through the qualifiers here. My gender, my non-secular self-asserted sex-based identity narrative is non-binary. But is it unproven? Not really. It's observable. It's my lived experience. Is it faith-based? Is it implicitly religious or moral? Absolutely not. Is it a story? Maybe the greatest story ever told. In order to define gender out of existence, lawmakers have to go out of their way to define it as several things that it is definitely not. Which, again, very George Orwell 1989 Animal Crossing. And in this same bill, sexual orientation is defined as a mythology, dogma, doctrine, ideology, or orthodoxy that is inseparably linked to the religion of secular humanism. So this bill, and a similar one in Tennessee, prohibits the state of North Dakota from directly or symbolically creating, enforcing, or endorsing a policy that respects or promotes non-secular, self-asserted, sex-based identity narratives, sexual orientation orthodoxy, or non-secular marriage doctrine. Oops, I forgot to define that one. Non-secular marriage refers to so-called marriages between more than 2 people, persons of the same sex, a person and an animal, or a person and an object. Except non-secular is defined as faith-based, not proven, predicated on naked assertions or emotional feelings, not self-evident objective fact. So if 2 men get married, That's non-secular marriage, even though it doesn't fit the description of non-secular. So anyway, this bill basically prevents the state from acknowledging that trans or queer people exist. On paper, they are literally trying to define LGBTQ+ people out of existence. So that's pretty rough.
As conservatives, this is a hill worth dying on. This issue, because if we give up on this, if we let the left sort of have it with the gender madness and we give into it, then we've given up on reality. And once you give up on reality, what else is there worth fighting for?
Here Matt Walsh admits that his reality is one where there are no transgender men, there are no transgender women, and there are no non-binary people. And this is what's scary. Transgender people pose an existential threat to this kind of worldview. And if anyone's living in 1984, it's Matt Walsh. Instead of the incredibly rich tapestry of gender that we can observe across time and cultures, there's women and there's men. Nothing else. Just like in the book, how an incredibly rich tapestry of descriptors gets boiled down to good and ungood. The science surrounding sex and gender has exploded over the past several decades, and refusing to allow any of these new ideas to expand your worldview is exactly the kind of thing George Orwell warned against. And again, if 1984 is too heady for you, we can bring it back to Frindle. Imagine if Nick Allen, instead of rebranding the pen, rebranded himself. Imagine if Nick Allen one day came out as non-binary, and he said, "My pronouns are they and them." And the teacher insisted that no, Nick's pronouns are he and him. You must adhere to what the dictionary prescribes for you. All the kids are on board with Nick's gender, and the teacher keeps those kids after school to write, "Nick's pronouns are he, him" 1,000 times. Who's wrong? Who's the bad guy? Hint, it's not the non-binary 5th grader. It's the teacher. Nick is just trying to express themselves, and they have an authoritarian teacher keeping them down. And guess what? This exact scenario is already happening across the country. Lots of children are being told that they understand less about their own gender than this guy. We can be sure that the right-wing stance on gender is wrong because there doesn't actually seem to be one. As I was watching through clips for this essay, I honestly struggled to find anything super offensive. Now, there was certainly offensive stuff, but when you stick to the mainstream, ultimately everyone just sounds confused. They know they're not supposed to like transgender people, but no one really seems to understand why.
Our Nancy Mace said this, though. She said, birthing people, I think that we have this here from Nancy Mace. Can you pull it up for me? We might not have it. Rachel, I thought it was actually really smart, though. She's basically saying that birthing people, that they're taking away the one thing, like that moms, like that's what you get. Like women are moms, and you are like the greatest mom, and here you are. And I think that birthing people's brunch does not sound very attractive on Mother's Day.
No, it's not attractive.
And because they don't understand transgender issues, they can't actually have a debate about them. So all they can do seems to be just make sure the audience is confused.
Tweeting, Senator Booker and I reintroduced the Mommies Act to expand Medicaid coverage for birthing people. Every pregnant person should be listened to and treated with dignity and respect. What?
We are the party of non-secular, self-asserted, sex-based identity narratives. But it's the transes who are wrong for suggesting that sometimes it's a man who gives birth. Although I tried not to get too deep into 1984, I have to pull a quote here. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. You're being told by one side that there are men and there are women, and there are people who are neither, and there are people who are both, and just about any combination thereof. And all of that is just observable fact. And the other side tells you that there are men who are born with penises and women who are born with uteruses and no one else. And if trans people and non-binary people simply don't exist in your mind, then there is no ethical question. If they don't exist, then they don't need human rights. That's what's at stake. That's why our language matters.